Hey, what's up everyone? Alex here. So, I released a video called JRPGs that make you feel young, and one of you actually said that we clearly need an opposite themed list. But making you feel old isn't always the most pleasant of experiences. And I say this because there was a time when we were young that we just couldn't wait to grow up, to have all the money in the world, to buy all the video games that our family and relatives refused to buy for us, only to realize that adulting is really hard. And so in this video, I decided to compile 10 JRPGs that make us feel mature, not old. Games that capture how our minds and hearts changed as we grew older and ask new questions like about our social life, mortality, or the legacies that we leave behind. But as with the previous list, there are more than 10 JRPGs that make you feel more aged and wizened. So do me a favor, post your picks in the comments below and let's talk about it. Anyway, let's find out what those 10 JRPGs are. Lost Odyssey was made by the father of Final Fantasy, Hironobu Sakaguchi, and answers the question, what would a turn-based Final Fantasy look like after 10? But to merely frame it as a spiritual successor to those games doesn't do it justice. Lost Odyssey is a sad tale about immortals who have lived for a millennia, and how the fleeting nature of relationships change because of it. We often think of the idea of living forever as a blessing, but what of the connections with the people we meet? How many loves and sunrises and sunsets do you see until it all feels banal and unimportant? For the cast of Lost Odyssey, all they want is a peace that they long deserve. And as you play more of the game and experience the lives the cast has all lived, it'll keep tugging at your heartstrings even more, pondering mortality and the legacy that'll be left behind. It might not be reflected in the actual tactile gameplay, but the twists and turns you control in triangle strategy and how you respond to it definitely says a lot more about you than you might think. While the streamlined nature of its battle and progression systems appealed to many turn-based fans who have never played tactical JRPGs before, its devious political machinations all set us up for some form of failure, ensuring that no matter the choice we make, that the outcome won't be the best for everyone. And yet, despite us all knowing that, the ones who have a lot of vested interest in every choice made in the game, coupled with having to convince our comrades to vote alongside us, made the stakes feel really high, as their differences in opinion slowly splintered the group. Triangle strategy will often make you question what you're fighting for and why, while smartly tying in jobs with specific characters, which make their motivations memorable, and their stories add to the overall lore of the world. It's definitely not for everyone, but triangle strategy ranks up there for me alongside the greatest tactical JRPGs of all time. When you consider both Yakuza Like a Dragon and its sequel, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, it becomes quickly apparent that making friends as an adult is hard. Take Ichiban Kasuga, a down-and-out ex-Yakuza whose loyalty to his friends makes him look like a weirdo in a sea of people, thinking his niceties are just for show. Heck, he's easily taken advantage of at every opportunity, proven by the time he woke up naked in the middle of a beach in Hawaii. And while Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth's serious story and goofy side quests might feel a bit juvenile, there's a very real level of maturity at play here. And dare I say, a lesson to be learned about adulting too? Not that you're bound to encounter any Yakuza anytime soon. But straight up, Ichiban Kasuga's approach to life, especially magnified when contrasted to Kiryu's moody nature in Infinite Wealth, is a declaration that nice people still exist in the world. We just need to take them at face value and be less judgmental about things. His general wholesomeness oozes from his love of Dragon Quest, an overall vibe that he carries around in his heart, no matter how difficult things are. We can all learn from Ichiban's love of life, and it's a perspective that I cherish greatly. It might sound strange to find Xenoblade Chronicles 3 on this list, given how its main cast is mainly composed of teenagers. But given the short lifespan of 10 years given to each and every one of them, these teens are compelled to face existential questions in such an abrupt manner that they're forced to grow up quickly. And I know that some of us here did that too, myself included. But the strength that Noah and Mio obtained by living the very real consequence of their existence in Xenoblade Chronicles 3's world is nothing short of emotional, whose microcosm contrasts heavily with the vastness of its many lands, in ways that sometimes makes us feel insignificant. And this isn't even talking about how it's a fitting send-off to what has been an incredible trilogy of games that fully realizes Tetsuya Takahashi's vision and ambition that dates all the way back to 1998's Xenogears. While some might remember my Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance review talking about how you shouldn't play it if you played a ton of the previous release, I need to remind you that I spent 21 minutes talking about how awesome the original was. And when you consider how I lavishly praised that release, then Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance having a lot more features makes it a far better game despite my personal burnout. Maybe I didn't say it enough in my Vengeance review, but the fact that this Shin Megami Tensei game took a bold risk of focusing so much more on its gameplay when compared to other Atlus JRPGs is a gamble that I absolutely respect. And when you take in the new canon of Vengeance storyline and tie that into your experience of playing through the original canon, and you've got a nuanced storyline that's got some of the classic elements of Shin Megami Tensei peppered in, which literally alters your perception of the world you're exploring. Maybe the game had the Vengeance subtitle because it feels like the devs have something to prove, but regardless, we all got to benefit from the incredible changes and additions to this re-release. Final Fantasy games tend to have a good balance of comedy and drama, and even the most serious titles tend to inject some form of silliness to balance out their heavy plots. Final Fantasy XVI, on the other hand, is the most consistently straight-laced entry in the mainline series. That isn't to say that there isn't any humor or levity to be had, but it's a kind of humor that's dry and different from everything that came before, particularly whenever Gab is on screen. However, these moments are admittedly rather few and far in between. The result is an entry that feels far more Game of Thrones than it does a typical JRPG. And yes, for the purposes of our video, Yoshi P, we are calling it that. Kidding aside, I don't think the comparison with Game of Thrones is a bad thing. This gives the game a unique vibe and helps it stand out amongst other games in the series, making it feel the most down-to-earth out of all of them, which is kind of funny to say since it also indulges in some over-the-top kaiju-style spectacle. Final Fantasy sometimes gets accused of being too anime, for the lack of a better word, and in a way, I can see where people are coming from. That in mind, I don't think anyone can say that of Final Fantasy XVI. It's very clear that they wanted this game to feel gritty and epic, and I think they absolutely accomplished that. Final Fantasy XVI is a bold and striking game for the series, with a more serious and grounded tone that has me excited for what new and exciting directions the series could go in. And what's more is that this game was just announced for the PC, with a demo available right now, and it's coming out September 17th. It's interesting to see the current state of the Fire Emblem franchise, especially compared to entries before Fire Emblem Awakening changed everything. However, these newer entries undeniably take a different approach when compared to the older games, and the one that comes to mind that exemplifies this is Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. When it comes to political drama, Path of Radiance is a shining example of how to do it right. It starts small with Ike's personal problems, learning to take over the Grail mercenaries and living up to the standard of his father before him. As the plot unfolds, you naturally learn more about the world, its inhabitants, and the ensuing war. It walks this perfect balance of being approachable and easy to understand, without feeling as if the game is talking down to you. All the while, we also see Ike transform from an inexperienced young man trying to run a ragtag mercenary group into a truly great leader in charge of a full-blown army. Most coming-of-age stories can tend to feel a bit juvenile, yet Path of Radiance is anything but. This is because rather than simply seeing a boy become a man, it feels like we're seeing someone ignorant and sheltered become a mature and well-rounded individual, which I think is a distinct difference. From its plot to its characters, Path of Radiance exudes a sense of maturity we rarely ever see from Nintendo, but that's part of what makes it so special. Parasite Eve stars Aya Brea, a cop in New York who finds herself wrapped in a strange plot concerning mitochondria, spontaneous human combustion, and shape-shifting creatures. The plot synopsis sounds closer to a Resident Evil game than it does a JRPG, but that's part of what makes Parasite Eve so unique. This is also what gives the game an air of maturity you often don't see in the genre. Fantasy games can have a habit of feeling a bit childish, unless they're a political drama or dark fantasy. But Parasite Eve is able to avoid all of this by simply taking place in a contemporary setting and playing up its supernatural elements. All that aside, I think Aya Brea herself should get a lot of credit for why the game comes together so well and is able to achieve this tone. Aya is just a cool character without trying to be one, as she exudes confidence even in the face of things she doesn't understand, never losing her composure. If the star of the game was some hot-blooded teenager, none of the other elements I praised earlier would work, as it would just fall apart, making Aya the glue that holds everything together, and why this game feels the way that it does. Tales games are often associated with colorful, fun-loving casts and fostering feelings of friendship and familiarity. Tales of Berseria is none of these things, giving it a distinctly different vibe. Rather than palling around with childhood friends and welcoming new wholesome allies into the fold, Berseria's cast is composed of anti-heroes that are working together purely out of convenience and self-serving agendas. While a sense of camaraderie can be felt by the end of the story, for the rest of it, this group feels like it'll blow up at any moment, creating a feeling of tension rarely seen within a JRPG cast. This has much to do with the age of the characters, with only a single child and the rest being full-grown adults, a far cry from the usual band of teenagers we tend to see in these types of games. The plot is also much darker than most JRPGs, with its narrative conveyed through scenes with explicit violence, and its main characters being perceived as villains throughout most of the story. Imagine playing a game where most townsfolk gossip about you, thinking that you're trying to destroy the world, not realizing that you're there, hearing their misguided chit-chat. Makes you want to tap into your inner villain, doesn't it? Yoko Taro is a silly man. He wears a weird Emil mask all the time, cracks jokes about himself, often at Square Enix's expense, and generally loves to troll everyone. It's surprising then that his games tend to be so consistently dark, mature, and thought-provoking. From Drakengard to NieR Replicant version 1.22474487139, still got that memorized, Yoko Taro's games have impressed, with compelling narratives and worldview-changing philosophies. Out of all of them, however, I feel that NieR Automata is his most successful, in that it manages to have a great story on the face of it, but also one that also has you thinking about what it was trying to convey years after its release. There are definitely some goofy moments here and there. Clearly, Yoko Taro can't help but inject some silliness into all of his works, but despite that, the general feelings of NieR Automata are that of melancholy and loneliness. Wandering around a post-apocalyptic world, destroying machine after machine, and not seeing a single human soul in sight, it's hard not to reflect on the fact that we're androids, fighting on in a dead world, in a pointless conflict that seemingly never ends. Pretty heavy stuff. The combination of the game's sometimes disturbing brutality, ponderous narrative, and uncanny atmosphere make it a unique experience that I would hesitate to recommend it to anyone that isn't mature enough to truly grasp what it's trying to say. And those, my dear friends, are 10 JRPGs that make us feel mature, not old. As I mentioned before, there's gotta be other games that make us feel this way, and a bit ponderous too. So post your list of games in the comments below and let's talk about it. And in case you haven't yet, I highly recommend checking out my list of 10 JRPGs that make you feel young, just to round it out with this one. And alternatively, I also reviewed an incredible Metroidvania in Gestalt, Steam, and Cinder. You can find them all right here, so go check them out. Thank you very much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.